What is up, guys? Dzeeff here, and oh my gosh, I cannot believe we are sitting here doing an Altergeist deck profile with not just one, not just two, but three copies of Altergeist Multifaker less than a year after Multifaker originally got limited. Now, I know there have been a lot of mixed reactions to the ban list, and while I do understand where Konami was coming from, I also know a lot of players wanted way more hits. Regardless, I just want to thank you guys so much for the outpouring of support that you guys sent my way over the past couple of days. I saw so many nice comments and so many nice messages and a lot of really funny memes. You guys really are the best audience a person could ask for, and I really appreciate all of the positivity that I saw on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and all that stuff in relation to my thoughts about Altergeist with 3 Multifaker. I will say here, I am a little bit unprepared. I did not predict Altergeist Multifaker going to 3 copies per deck, and I mean I'm unprepared in that I don't have 3 prismatic secret rares. So I actually, this entire time I've been using one European print prismatic secret rare that actually came from the World Championship, because some of the players got to open Megatons early at the World Championship, and so this is a European version of Multifaker. And then I also have one North American version here. You can see they look a little bit different. The ink that they use, I guess, is different, but I don't actually own 3 copies of prismatic Multifaker, so we have to use the ultra rares for today's video. Just as a side note, if any of you guys actually happen to own 2 European prismatic secret rare Multifakers, please send me a message on Twitter. I would be happy to buy them from you. Before we get into the deck profile, don't forget, if you want to buy any of these cards that are featured in today's video, please use my link to tcgplayer.com. It'll be in the description below. A portion of all those sales go right back into the channel, so I really appreciate it when you guys use that link. Anyway, let's take a look at Altergeists. And I want to say here, is this deck top tier right now? Absolutely not. It is still just a rogue strategy, but it is a lot better. And the funny thing is, and I post this on Twitter, but I actually learned how to play the deck a lot better because I only had one Multifaker. Before this video and over the last couple days, I was doing some combos with this deck, and I noticed that almost all of the combos that I've been doing with one Multifaker still work and are still the right choice in most cases, even with 3 Multifaker. The difference is that when your combos get interrupted, you now have something to fall back on. There were some awkward situations where you would have to use the Multifaker to start the combo, and then your opponent interrupted you, so you couldn't get to the Prime Banshee or the Manifestation, and that was really bad. And also now the consistency is through the roof. We no longer, and I'm sorry for all the fans of that card, but we no longer have to ever worry about playing Sangan in our decks. Anyway, here's the deck profile, and I think this deck actually can compete as a rogue strategy. It is going to have an uphill battle against decks like Eldritch, but I think it actually does perform a little bit better than you might expect, especially with 3 Multifaker. Anyway, for the Altergeist monsters, we have, yes, 3 copies of Multifaker. These are actually the ones that I've been taped up behind me in all my videos with a face cam that you've probably seen in the background. 3 copies of Marionetter, 3 copies of Altergeist, Multiseek, man, it feels good to play 3 of all those again, and 2 copies of Silk and 1 copy of Concrete. You guys already know this lineup, or at least you probably remember this lineup, and yeah, it definitely makes a big difference having 2 more copies of those Multifakers. I think you've seen at least 2, maybe more deck profiles from me with this deck where I literally cannot think of what to put in as the 39th and 40th card in the list. Well, now I don't have to worry about that anymore because we just have 2 extra copies of Multifaker. When it came down to it, there were so many times that I was looking for other cards that were as good or at least almost as good as Multifaker, like Sangan and Trap Trick and stuff, just consistency boosters, but nothing really replaces the 2 extra copies of the actual Multifaker. Also, I guess it increases the odds that you open Faker Impermanence. Obviously, it's not like the big reason to play this deck, but it is just like a random auto win that you can draw going second that's really strong. For the hand traps, because this format has a lot of combo decks, we're going to have a lot of these. So we have 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 2 copies of Effect Veiler, and 2 copies of Nibiru, and also, as you'll see a little bit later here, we also have, of course, 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. So here's the thing with hand traps in a trap deck, because this is an actual trap strategy. We are playing a lot of trap cards. Hand traps are good for going second, obviously, but also they're just good in general, especially games 2 and 3, because your opponent is going to side into cards like Evenly Matched and Lightning Storm and Twin Twisters and Cosmic Cyclone and all those cards, Red Reboot. So it's important to not have all of your eggs in one basket. You don't just want to have all of your back row cards be your only form of interruption. You want to have cards in your hand just in case your opponent Lightning Storms you and you don't have the out to it. You do have a lot of outs to Lightning Storm and Evenly Matched, but you don't always draw them. Sometimes they draw multiple copies of their cards. So having hand traps is really important for that reason. I think these are like the best ones this format. I really liked DD Crow, and I still do like DD Crow, but I think right now, because everyone is just playing those Hellkey Firebacks combos, Effect Veiler is really, really good. You want to be careful though with Nibiru. I'll point that out just because you cannot Nibiru and Multifaker in the same turn. So sometimes you want to use that Nibiru earlier than the Multifaker, and it can create some tricky situations, decision points that you have to make, but just keep that in mind when you're using that card. Anyway, for the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. I know this card is very expensive, I know not everyone can afford it, and hopefully the Toon Chaos reprint decreases the price just a little bit, so it's a little bit more affordable for those budget players out there. I'm not sure actually how much it'll decrease the price of Extravagance, because we don't know. I mean, I think it's one of the more rare cards in the set, but hopefully more players can have access to it. But this is one of the biggest reasons to play Altergeists. It is really just like an auto-win card, sort of. I mean, it's pretty much just Pot of Greed in this deck. It's really, really strong. There's almost no drawback in a deck like Altergeist, or really any deck that you're playing Extravagance in. You obviously don't care about the extra deck that much. Even if you banish 3 Hexia, who cares? I mean, you still drew 2 cards for free, so that's really, really good. Obviously a staple 3 of. We also have 1 copy of Duality. This honestly might be cuttable with 3 copies of Multifaker. I haven't really decided that yet. I used to play Duality in all my Altergeist deck lists, and I really liked that card, especially even before Extravagance came out, just as like a consistency booster. But these days I'm not so sure if actually it is worth it to have the 1 Duality. There are some cards that I'll mention at the end of the deck profile that I really want to try to fit into this deck, but the space is just really tight with all the hand traps, and this is probably one of the more cuttable cards. Your deck is a lot more consistent with those 2 extra copies of Faker, so you don't always need to dig for better options. And then we have 1 copy of 1 for 1. The best possible hand you can draw in this deck when you go first is Marionetter, Multifaker, and 1 for 1. Is that going to happen very often? I mean, absolutely not. But when it does, you'll pretty much automatically win those games. I know it sounds like I'm mentioning a lot of auto wins here, like Faker Impermanence and Opening Extravagance and that combo that I just said, but that's one of the things that I like about this deck, is that you actually do have a lot of really, really powerful openings going first or second that maybe not everybody knows about. But yeah, 1 for 1 is probably one of the better cards in this deck if you can actually draw it. Obviously, it's just a 1 of, and you can also discard like extra hand traps. You don't necessarily need like 2 Nibiru in your hand or 2 Ash. You can just 1 for 1, one of those out of your hand. Even just using this card to like special a Multiseek, discarding something random, and then making a Link Creepo and making the Marionetter, setting Protocol, Marionetter effect to send itself to special the Multiseek back. It's actually really good because now you have a Protocol and a Multiseek, so when your opponent uses a monster effect, you can Protocol the Multiseek, stop their effect, and then search Faker. And then if you have any other trap cards, which you probably do because it only took the 1 for 1 and the 1 monster to get there, and your deck is like half trap cards, if you have any other trap cards, then you can trigger that Multifaker almost immediately, which is really great. Anyway, for those trap cards, so this is where I've kind of slimmed down a lot because we have to make room for those hand traps because there's so many crazy combo cards right now. So we have 3 copies of Personal Spoofing, 2 copies of Protocol, and 1 copy of Manifestation. I really didn't think that 2 Manifestation was correct even in the last format when we had 1 Multifaker, but I think now especially you do not need the extra copies of Manifestation. For the rest of the cards, we have 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. Obviously that brings us up to 10 hand traps. I actually did consider playing Phantasme in this deck over the Duality and 1 for 1. Not so sure about that though, because then you have a lot of cards that conflict with the Multifaker. You have the Phantasme, the Nibiru, and they get worse and worse as the game goes on. Obviously they're very good going second when it's the very first turn of the duel and you don't usually have access to the Multifaker unless you open Impermanence Multifaker, but after like turn 1 of the game it just gets worse and worse as the game gets longer. Anyway, we also have the 6 Solemns, so we have 3 copies of Solemn Judgment and 3 copies of Solemn Strike. These are the best Solemn cards. I do not really like Warning. It's not because of the life points so much. I mean, obviously it's 500 more than Strike, and usually it's like 2,000 less life points than Judgment. These cards are just the most impactful though. Strike's really good against a lot of things that Warning actually can't hit. Strike on hand traps is actually particularly good. You don't really want to get ashed in a lot of situations, especially in like your spoofing or whatever. And then as far as Judgment goes, I mean, it's just the best trap card in the entire deck that's not an Altergeist themed card. It is just so strong. It stops the Lightning Storm, it stops the evenly match, it stops the big combos your opponent's trying to do. This is a card that you want to open as early and often as possible. I mean, really just both of these cards you just want to open as often as you can, so you're going to play 3 copies. And then our last card is 1 Imperial Order. This card actually might be cuttable in the main deck. It doesn't really do anything going second, obviously, and this deck already performs pretty well when it goes first, so do you really need a Floodgate to win? Probably not in most cases. It probably could be in the side deck, but man, you can just steal some game 1s with Imperial Order sometimes, and it just really gets in there, so I like playing the 1 copy in the main deck. That brings us to the extra deck here, and I will mention that we do have a couple proxies. I don't really like doing proxies in deck profiles. I think I did 1 or 2 in the last deck profile of Altergeist, but there's some new cards that came out, and I didn't really expect doing another Altergeist deck profile. I did not expect Faker going to 3, so I did not buy these cards in advance. So I'll just kind of talk about them as we go through here, and I'll put put them on the screen so you guys can still read them. So first off, we have 3 copies of Hextia, the best card in the extra deck. There's also 1 copy of Prime Banshee. This card isn't as important anymore now that we have 3 Multifaker, because its main purpose is recycling that Faker, but still that big combo that I posted a couple times where you make like double Hextia, Protocol Manifestation with Faker in hand, all of that is still the best way to play this deck, and it is done through Prime Banshee. It uses the least amount of resources to get you the most amount of on-field cards, so I still want to play the 1 copy, and honestly you could even play 2, but I'm playing some other stuff that you'll see in a moment. We also have 3 copies of Link Kribo, because I always want to be able to send that Mulseek on turn 1. 1 copy of Almirage. There's no Sanguine in this deck, so this card might not seem that important, but obviously it can send the Mulseek to the grave, but more importantly, I know it sounds like it'll never come up, but basically if you have a Silk and Manifestation in your opening hand, having access to this card is super important, which I think I mentioned like a million times at this point. 1 Relinquished Anima. It's a really good Link 1 monster for going second. I think that a lot of players will play around it, and I think especially in like 1 match, your opponent will only fall for it 1 time, and a lot of times they just accidentally play around it, so I don't think having more than 1 copy is necessary. It's just like a good one of that you can summon some of the times. And then also 2 copies of Link Cross. This is a very important card. I know it's doing crazy degenerate things in other decks, but in this deck the entire purpose is that when you can make 1 Hextia but you can't do anything else, like you don't have a 3rd monster to make another Hextia or the Prime Banshee or full combo, you can use the Link Cross and you can summon it on top of the Hextia because it's a Link 2 monster, and then immediately search that Multifaker, which is really strong. Even if you already have the Multifaker, it's still good because now you can just add Manifestation or Protocol or Concrete or whatever you want. So Link Cross is a big addition to this strategy. We also have 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix, which I mean honestly none of these cards ever come up. 1 copy of Phoenix, 1 copy of Saline. I like this card a lot in this deck. It might not seem like it comes up, but it does count spell cards on either side of the field and also either player's graveyard. So as long as there's 3 spell cards somewhere between those places, you can immediately use this card to special summon back one of your Altergeists monsters because they're all spellcasters, and then you can upgrade into Access Code Talker, which is our other proxy that we're playing, and that's really powerful. I think Access Code Talker is particularly good in Altergeist. Yes, you can break boards, especially if your deck is sort of already doing what it wants to do. You can have a big Hextia, you can have multiple copies of Mulseek, you can bounce cards with Silk, but the Access Code Talker is just, I mean, it's so big and it pops so many cards, and it's really hard for your opponent to interact with, so I like this interaction quite a lot. And then lastly, we have 1 Borreload Dragon. It's just a good piece of removal for cards that are normally difficult to deal with this deck. It's not always going to work out, but when it does work out, it is like the only card in your entire deck that actually will win in those certain situations. And then lastly, for the side deck, and this is going to change depending on what metagame you're playing in. Maybe you're just playing in local tournaments online or whatever through remote dueling or whatever you play locals through, and in those cases you might want to change your side deck a little bit, maybe even your main deck. Maybe your friends don't play Eldritch or Adamancipator, so you don't have to go as hard against those strategies, you don't have to play as many hand traps, but I will say that this side deck is pretty generic and it should be good against a variety of matchups. Anyway, we have the 3rd copy of Nibiru, and it's really good against combo decks. Obviously you don't really want 3 copies in your main deck because it's not good in every single matchup, and it's also kind of weak going first, but going second you just want to draw as many hand traps as possible. You want to stop your opponent's combo. We also have 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. It's really good going first or second against any back row deck, but especially Eldritch, because this deck actually can grind really well. You have a lot of cards that plus when they go to the graveyard, you know, the lots of recycling, but the Cosmic Cyclone really helps you outpace the Eldritch players by banishing those key trap cards. Banishing their Cursed Eldland is a big deal as well. So Cosmic Cyclone, great card against a lot of decks, but especially Eldritch. When you go first, you always want to side into a Pointer of the Red Lotus. This card is insanely powerful. It hits the Lightning Storm, it hits the Evenly Matched, hits all sorts of cards. Even if they don't have those in their hand, you can just hit the best card. I think this card is actually getting used in a lot more strategies, but just in case you didn't know about it, it is one of the best cards to play in any deck right now, but especially a trap deck like Altergeist, where people have so many side deck cards to just completely crush your entire strategy. We also have 3 copies of Rivalry of the Warlords. I haven't played this card in a little while, but I think it's actually really good right now. There are a lot of Link monsters and a lot of tuners that are machine monsters, but once your opponent is actually trying to set up their board past those initial summons, like when they're trying to go into the Borreload Savage Dragon or the Herald of the Arclight, they really can't do that if you have Rivalry, and there's just a lot of like crazy extra deck monsters that are different types right now that people are trying to go into. Rivalry can just kind of completely shut your opponent down. I do like this card more than Summon Limit. Summon Limit has a couple problems. The main problem is that it does prevent you from ever making your own big board. I know people don't think of this deck as like a deck that puts out huge boards, but if you ever watched me play this deck, you realize that, yeah, it's a pretty big combo deck. You can end on some pretty insane fields, and some limit kind of restricts you from doing that. And a lot of times, it's not even like that big of deal to stop your opponent's like summons, because while something like Rivalry can just completely skip their turn, summon limit they usually can just deal with on the very next turn after you use it. So if your hand is kind of bad, it doesn't actually do anything, because then they have still summoned a bunch of times. They can just bring out like Nightmare Phoenix and pop the summon limit, where Rivalry of Warlords is a lot more difficult to actually deal with. And then we have 3 copies of Evenly Matched, a good going second card against a lot of decks, just generic decks in general, but also back row decks are really good. You're not really siding this card too much against decks like Adamancipator or other combo decks. Sometimes against Eldritch can be the right call, if you just want to like bait their Warlord Savage Dragon sometimes, and then maybe evenly match them in battle phase. That's really good, and it helps your other plays go through as well. And then lastly, we have 3 copies of Heavy Stormduster. This is by far the most cuttable card in the entire list. I think this card is pretty good. I still have been playing this card, and it has been performing pretty well, but I think there are certainly other cards you can consider. I do like that new Gizmek Fox card. That thing's pretty cool. You'd have to cut like one other card for me. Side deck here, probably like the Nibiru for the barrier statue, but that card's pretty cool if you want more hand traps. There's just a lot of other cards in general. For cards that I wanted to maybe play in the main deck, but I didn't have room for, Lost Wind is a big one. I think Lost Wind is really good. Maybe even that new Titano Trap card that's like a different version of Lost Wind. I like those cards a lot. I also did consider Solemn Warning. I personally am not a huge fan, but if you think you're going to get lucky with those die rolls, by all means put in more Solemns. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's deck profile of a new format Altergeist with 3 Multifaker. I'm not sure if it's going to be a tier 1 or tier 0 strategy. I really doubt that, but I do think it's going to be a solid rogue contender, and I'm obviously a huge fan of the deck. I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.